I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. A few weeks ago I ranked the bosses of Majora's Mask. Today we're ranking the dungeons. If there's one thing Majora's Mask had to do right, it was create a set of engaging and challenging dungeons to compensate for their amount. After all, 4 main dungeons plus the moon itself isn't really a lot. Ironic, given Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild have the same amount of main quest dungeons in their games as well, but this was a different time. We were so used to the 8 dungeon formula that any less was an offense, a shock to the system. Majora's Mask dungeons also have the added objective of needing to find 15 stray fairies. Some are pretty easy to spot and obtain, while others require a lot of thought and knowledge to collect. It's not really my favourite gimmick, as I'm a perfectionist collector, which means the idea of missing a single stray fairy makes me ill inside. Now, I'm choosing not to rank the mini-dungeons this time around, but if you want a quick rundown, Beneath the Well would be last. I don't think I need to explain how tedious this place is in the N64 version, as it constantly siphons out all your items. Pirate Fortress is next. I'm just not a fan of the stealth segments, so I was more than happy to stone mask my way through. Plus, if you don't have enough bottles to collect all the Zora eggs, I'm so sorry. Then there's the Swamp Spider House. It's pretty average. I like the eastern flair the textures have, and it's a fun area to explore your first time through. Then the Oceanside Spider House. I like the spooky aesthetic, and coming here with the Skullkeeper mask allows you to access a randomized puzzle. Good stuff. Ancient Castle of Arcana is the clear best mini-dungeon. It utilizes your new mirror shield, there's a piece of heart to obtain, and the joy of seeing dancing Redeads warms my heart every time I see them. Plus, it has a genuinely great boss fight at the end. Hot take, if Ancient Castle of Arcana were on my main list, it would be my number 3. Do with that what you will. So let's not waste any more time. All 5 dungeons in the Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask ranked. Let me know your favorite down below. At number 5 we have Inside the Moon, the final dungeon of the game, though I hesitate to even call it as such. Entering the moon, you're greeted by a lone tree and a sprawling grassy plain that stretches out to infinity. 5 children can be found playing around the tree, 4 wearing the remains of the bosses we fought to get here, 1 wearing Majora's Mask itself. Each of the children wearing the boss masks will teleport you to special hide-and-seek zones, locations filled with puzzles that require the use of your 3 special transformation masks, as well as a 4th containing a mini-boss rush. For the Adolwa mask, you take on a room filled with Deku flowers and try to fly your way over to a piece of heart, and then to the door. It's tricky getting the timing down, but this late in the game, you should be fine. For the Got mask, you take on a Goron rolling puzzle, and I'll be honest, it's probably my least favorite room in the game. The first half requires you to just move in a straight line till you reach max speed and then let go of the controls, bouncing off the chests as you go, until you reach the second half of the area. From there, walk along these thin bridges until you can get to the door leading to the child, which will allow you to respawn from there if you fall into a chasm. The last part of the challenge is hard for me because I struggle when using the analog sticks to keep my character moving straight. Not just in Majora's Mask, in most games. It feels like I'm always veering off to the left or the right, and it makes everything feel much harder than it probably is. It's why I really struggle with fighting games, because I can't put the inputs in correctly. I love the concept of the Goron roll ability, I just think the N64 controls specifically are a bit too finicky for me. I had way less issue on the 3DS, for example. For the Gjorg mask, you take on a Zora swimming puzzle, though the puzzle is just picking left or right and praying you end up in the right spot. Using a guide is always okay here because there's no skill involved, just tedium and trial and error, which is my least favorite type of challenge. And for the Twin Mold mask, it's the boss rush. We've already taken on a prior boss rush in Akana Canyon for a piece of heart, so this is no biggie. I wish we got to see Gomez again, robbed queen only appearing once in the game. Then you chat with Majora, get the Fierce Deity mask if you've given the children all 20 side quest masks from the game, and on with the final boss. It's a dungeon in the sense that there's an official boss at the end, but it's more of a series of challenge rooms, and that's what drops it down to a very obvious last place. I don't think anyone's going to be debating otherwise. At number 4, we have Snowhead Temple, the second dungeon in the game. As a concept, I think Snowhead is a fascinating location to explore. It's a vertical tower that has you finding different ways to climb up to the higher floors so you can collect the fire arrows and use them to melt your way even higher. The way the temple is cold at the top, but towards the bottom you've got these lava pools that Goron Link can walk through is interesting, but it feels like a half-assed attempt at a fire and ice trope that doesn't go remotely far enough to feel interesting. The main puzzle is using Goron Link to roll over large ramps and around various corners to reach different rooms in the central chamber. Sometimes it's as simple as rolling forwards. Other times you're going around the corners while a metal grate lies waiting in case you fall. But my problem is just how easy it is to mess up your momentum and end up going to the floors below. Take this straight ramp. I don't feel like I did anything wrong here, but the game just said, no momentum for you, go downstairs and think about what you've done. Or how about the infamous corner curve towards the end of the dungeon that doesn't have a grate protecting your fall? It takes ages to get back up here, and after my second fail, how embarrassing, I had no regrets about using a Nintendo Switch save state to reattempt the challenge. Moments like these add stakes to the dungeon, and I fully see what Nintendo was going for, but when I feel the controls are actively getting in my way, failing a simple corner curve can be frustrating, to say the least. You first have to collect the fire arrows, which will allow you to access more rooms on the lower floor, allowing you to reach a switch which will raise a central pillar. Within the pillar are ice discs that can be punched by Goron Link. And once all 4 have been smacked away, the path to the boss opens up. It's a fun concept as you're going up and down the dungeon, getting used to the layout, but I wish there was a little bit more done with it. The mini-boss is a total letdown. Wizrobe is here, and by god, he's going to be showing up again, and again, and again, and again, and again. His first appearance is fun. You use the mini-map to determine where the real boss is and give him a good old Goron punch, and if you fail, you take a brutal magic attack to the face that does significant damage. But his fight gets old very quickly, and they always add more teleporting pads or different pad elevations, like it'll make the fight more unique. Spoilers, it doesn't. In this dungeon, he guards both the fire arrows and the boss key, and I really wish he didn't. There's also one infamous stray fairy at the end that requires you to do a jump that, if you don't know the trick, well, you're falling down to the ground floor. I used a guide for the fairies, I have no regrets, but this is one of those that is so needlessly punishing and wastes so much time if you fail to reach it. None of the other temples have fairies quite this bad. Most Majora's Mask fans hate the Great Bay Temple for its seemingly convoluted layout and confusing progression, but for me, that title always goes to Snowhead. I take a wrong turn or two here almost every time I visit, and some of the ways to reach the upper floors I always forget. This room with the eye switch being a prime example. You come in here once at the very start of the game, forget it exists, and then come back here 2 hours later after looking up a guide. Also, screw this Goron Pound puzzle room. I got stuck in here for a while due to my inability to control Goron Link with any level of finesse, and I'm just very salty. Thank god the boss of this dungeon is so good. At number 3, we have Woodfall Temple, the first dungeon of the game. Compared to my scathing review of Snowhead, I'm far more positive on Woodfall, perhaps because it's a far more straightforward affair. To start with, it's an extremely linear dungeon. A majority of the temple takes place on the first floor, with a brief journey up to floor 2 which will get you access to a staircase leading to the upper part of the first floor. The main goal of the dungeon is to activate the central platform in the main chamber, which can only be done via the use of the bow. To get to the bow though, you have to complete most of the dungeon. You'll most often be using Deku Link to fly across gaps using the various Deku flowers scattered throughout the dungeon, from the opening room that has you needing to swerve to avoid skulltulas, to the upper second floor room where failure means walking the long way around. Unlike Snowhead though, Woodfall Temple is a far quicker dungeon to navigate, and you're less likely to make mistakes due to the easier nature of the puzzles. It's the first dungeon in the game after all, it has to ease the player in. I like the enemy turtles that you can only damage by bursting up from a Deku flower as they pass over you, something that actually carries over to the mini-boss frog guarding the boss key. It's a simple concept but feels satisfying to pull off, and teaches the player that even as a simple Deku scrub, you've got the ability to defend yourself, and you can use this against the boss if you're careful enough. Perhaps the most infamous room in the temple is this block pushing room. Here there are swarms of moths that will follow your flame, and if you mistime your movement, Link might jump off into the poison water and maybe almost certainly die. You have to light various torches with a Deku stick to open the door to floor 2, and this was the only room in the temple where I straight up almost had a game over. How embarrassing. The mini-boss for the bow was just a Denalphos, which I was expecting to be harder than it was. He can certainly attack Link, but he also dies in a couple of hits. I wanted a tougher challenge, that's all. Then once you get the bow, you step outside, immediately hit an eye switch that lets you fight the frog mini-boss for the boss key, something to remember if you're doing the Don Giro side quest later in the game, as you'll have to come back here to kill the frog. Standing on the central platform here and firing at the eye switch is a simple shortcut to get up there though. Then you fire your arrows through a lit torch in the central room to light other torches, as we still don't have fire arrows, opening the path to the boss, and causing the poison water in the temple to become healthy regular water instead, which can help players to get a stray fairy. The last room with all the Deku flowers is fun if you're just trying to navigate to the boss door, but I found it an absolute pain trying to get the last of the stray fairies. This one in particular had me frustrated because I just couldn't get my positioning right to reach it in time. I was, as the kids would say, an absolute mess, and made it way harder than I needed to. The dungeon ends with a solid boss fight against Adolwa in the N64 version. I'm so sorry if you're playing on the 3DS, you're getting Baby's first boss instead. But you know what isn't Baby? Supporting my channel. I'm trying to reach 35,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you finish this video and think, hey, this was fun, consider parrying that subscribe button. Or if you're feeling generous, consider becoming a channel member. It's $4.99 a month and gives you early access to future videos, as well as a shout out at the end of this video and in the description. It's entirely your call, but that support is what lets me continue making videos for you all. At number 2, we have the Great Bay Temple, the third dungeon of the game. Not me coming in with the scorching hot takes, but I really think Zelda's water dungeons get a bad rap from the fanbase. I'm not saying they're the pinnacle of Zelda game design, but I am saying that they're better than people give them credit for. The Great Bay Temple is one such location where I've always held a fondness for it. Here you have to change the flow of the temple's pipes to reach different rooms, which lead to key items like the ice arrows, the boss key, and ultimately the boss door. On the 3DS, they added arrows to dictate the flow of the pipes, making navigation far easier, and it is a change I'm fully on board with. But I don't think the N64 version is that hard to navigate on its own. Depending on where the water is flowing, you'll be able to go down specific paths denoted by the pipes active. At the start, it's the red ones, then later the yellow ones, then finally the green ones, which will take you to the boss. It's actually pretty hard to accidentally take the wrong path in the central chamber, but I do sympathize, as to change the direction of the water wheel, you have to go back to the first room of the temple, which many players might not realize, which is a totally fair oversight. The main puzzles revolve around ice arrows. In the N64 version, you can fire ice arrows at any body of water to create an ice platform you can hop on. This gives you a lot of freedom on how to solve puzzles, though on the flip side, it means you can accidentally put an ice block in just the wrong spot, which can be annoying, such as in this room, where you need to hookshot up to the ceiling to reach a stray fairy, and if you're in the wrong spot, your target reticle won't reach the hookshot target. I miss gyroscopic aiming on the 3DS, but I'll take the trade-off, as the 3DS version, for some reason, only lets you use ice arrows on very specific spots in the dungeon. There's no freedom on where to place your platforms, neutering the fun of the ice arrows and creating an overly linear puzzle experience. This is what happens when you complain about non-linear Great Bay Temple dungeon design, people. They course correct to an absurd degree and make it baby. Love the main mini-boss of this dungeon, Wart. It's a 3D variant of the Argus boss from A Link to the Past, and even if the fight itself is pretty simple, fire arrow the boss, slash the Wart, rinse and repeat until he starts slamming the walls, I really enjoyed it. Only issue was that Tattle would never correctly lock on to Wart in his final phase, which meant I couldn't line up my arrow shots most of the time. Changing the water flow, exploring the different rooms, swimming around as Zoralink, and collecting a ton of well-hidden stray fairies was a blast. I find this temple far more engaging and dynamic than the water temple, as if you know what you're doing, you'll only be changing the water flow once or twice. It's just about finding switches, activating them, and that's it. Even a room with a simple seesaw gimmick has me being like, oh my god, this is so cool, because of the way you can raise them with ice arrows. Ultimately, while I can see why many players found this temple tedious to get through, and I don't want to invalidate anybody's experience, I think with a fresh perspective, you might find it far easier and more well designed than you thought. But that's just me. Still has nothing on our number one though. At number one, we have the Stone Tower Temple, the final main dungeon of the game. Over the years, I have sung the praises of the Stone Tower Temple to whomever would listen. The aesthetic of this ancient tower looming over Ikana, the fiery eyes of the statue outside that has such an ominous air about it, ooh. I think what makes the Stone Tower stand out to me straight away is its open-air nature. This is one of the first 3D Zelda dungeons outside of a few rooms in the Forest Temple to have a perfect view of the sky. It's such a simple effect, but having that bright blue skybox contrast with the ancient orange and brown tile set of the dungeon is really pleasing to me. The puzzles of the dungeon revolve around using the Elegy of Emptiness to create statues that Link can use to press down buttons. Using the human, Goron, and Zora forms almost immediately in the first room to press down a series of buttons sets the dungeon's tone as a real puzzle-focused experience. There's a lot of setup you do on your first pass on your journey to get the light arrows, as you'll be spawning a lot of chests through puzzles that you can't interact with right now. Weird that they'd appear on the ceiling, I wonder what that means. The enemies here are fun to fight, Bombchus, Armos statues, the usual underwater fish, and new enemies like the masked Hiploop, which remind me of the Helmasaurs from Link to the Past, and the Igors, who are some of the coolest enemies in the game. The puzzles here require the use of all three of Link's transformation masks. You might need Zora Link to swim through underwater rooms, or Deku Link to cross a lava-filled room with wind turbines, or Goron Link to collect one of the hardest stray fairies in the game by rolling through lava to reach a chest in time. There's a mirror shield puzzle room too, where depending on how long you reflect sunlight into these mirrors, they will then shoot a beam of light for that same amount of time, which you can then use to remove sunlight blocks in the environment. This is the type of puzzling I wish we got more of in the Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time. The first mini-boss is the Garrow Master, a really cool fight that requires a lot of careful dodging and timed hits to defeat. I love his attack where he vanishes, only to then appear from above, very anime. Killing him grants the player the light arrows, and then access to one of the coolest gimmicks in Zelda history. Exiting the dungeon, you can shoot this red jewel with a light arrow to flip the entire dungeon upside down. The music also changes to reflect this, and suddenly the weird ceiling architecture makes so much sense. Now, if you fail platforming in certain rooms, you're falling into the sky itself. How insane is that? You have to re-navigate the entire dungeon, recollecting chests, and even spawning a few new ones for those last few stray fairies. There are a couple of puzzles that use the flipping mechanic, such as this lava room and this block room, but they're honestly incredibly easy and feel like a brief bit of padding in what's otherwise a very snappy, well-designed dungeon. Also shoehorning in another Wizrobe rematch that really wasn't needed, but I digress. Getting the boss key is the coolest experience, as you'll face off against Gomez, who has one of the edgiest, coolest designs in the Zelda series. The boss itself wields a dark scythe, and to defeat it, you need to fire light arrows that will disperse the bats, leaving him open to whatever attack you deem correct. But who cares if it's easy or not? It's a standout, memorable design, and for me, that's kind of all that matters. Heading back to the starting room via a new door then allows you to spawn a chest that you can hookshot to, leading you to the boss room. But right before you reach the boss door, you also have the option to reflip the temple and collect the last couple of stray fairies before the boss fight. I do think it halts the momentum a tad for completionists, as flipping the temple also means having to reset the statues outside to cross back to the entrance, but I respect the design regardless. All leading to a boss that is spectacle over substance. I love the little touch that the Garrow Master mini-boss room is also the boss room of this temple, but flipped. I love the idea of falling into the sky and ending up in a vast desert expanse. Will this arena ever be explained? Probably not. I personally love the theory that we're fighting Twin Mold in hell, as the builders of the stone tower wanted to reach the heavens, only to have the temple flipped, which would naturally take them to the opposite, hell. Some dark lore if you really want to look into it, which none of the other temples in the game have to the same extent, which is then contrasted beautifully with the surprisingly upbeat and hopeful music that plays throughout. The flute really brings together this feeling of overcoming darkness and being able to get through the tough trials of this final dungeon in a way that no other location in the series has managed to match for me. When I eventually get around to doing a top 10 Zelda dungeons video, expect the Stone Tower to be in contention for that number 1 spot because, damn, it deserves it. And that's my list. Which Zelda dungeon is your favourite from Majora's Mask? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow me if you're comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord, whatever floats your boat. And a massive shout out to my channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, you help keep this channel alive, thank you so much, and I will see you all next time for the Oracle games. Adios.